They wheeled him into surgery. His leg was already black. Nurses rushed. Doctors whispered. The smell of dying flesh filled the hallway. And as the anesthesia took hold, Thomas Markle, estranged father of Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, mouthed just one thing through trembling lips. "Tell Meghan I forgive her." But there was no one on the other end of that forgiveness. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. No phone call, no video message, no last-minute plea to reconcile, not even a text. As Thomas lay under the knife, undergoing a brutal leg amputation in a Filipino hospital thousands of miles from his former life in Los Angeles, his daughter, the woman he once carried in his arms, beamed at from the audience of school plays, supported through Hollywood auditions, was silent. Painfully, deliberately, deafeningly silent. The world waited. But Meghan didn't flinch. This is the story of a father left behind, a daughter who walked away, and a silence so loud, it's echoing through every hospital corridor, every family dinner table, every headline around the world. Why hasn't Meghan Markle reached out to her father as he faces a life-or-death battle? Is this a story of justified boundaries, or of unforgivable neglect? What secret events led to a royal daughter refusing to visit her amputated father? And more chillingly, what if she never intends to see him again? We're about to unravel a devastating timeline, packed with painful contradictions, high-stakes drama, secret communications, emotional landmines, and unanswered questions that demand attention. Because this isn't just a family drama. It's a royal scandal, a Hollywood tragedy, a human catastrophe, and it's playing out in real time. So why does it matter now? Because the clock is ticking. Thomas Markle is 81 years old. He's survived multiple heart attacks, a stroke, and even an earthquake. But now, as doctors scramble to save what's left of his remaining leg, they're warning this is different. The next 48 to 72 hours are critical. Sepsis could set in. Infection could spread. And yet, despite global headlines, a tsunami of media coverage, and countless public pleas from friends, family, and fans, there's still no word from Meghan. Not a letter, not a phone call, not even a public statement. And for many watching this unfold, the silence feels like cruelty. Because even if you believe Meghan had reasons to distance herself from her father, even if you sympathize with the pain of family betrayal, the trauma of invasive media, the toxicity of estranged siblings, there's something deeply human, almost primal, about a dying parent's last wish. To be seen, to be heard, to be forgiven. But what if the daughter won't come? What if she refuses? And what if, behind that refusal, there's a story Meghan doesn't want you to know? What if this isn't just estrangement, but retaliation? What if her silence is a message? This video isn't about judgment. It's about exposure. We're going to dissect every detail, from the moment Thomas's foot turned black to the chilling hospital decisions, the family's desperate media appeals, and the final messages Thomas Markle may have written for a daughter who hasn't spoken to him since 2018. We'll look at the real timeline, the unheard phone calls, the secret surgeries, the final letters, the strategic silences, and the heartbreaking truth behind Meghan Markle's refusal to see the man who raised her. This isn't fiction. This is happening, right now. And whether you're a fan of Meghan Markle, a critic, or just someone who believes in second chances, what comes next may challenge everything you thought you knew. Because the real twist? Meghan was told, and she still didn't come. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back. Way back. Back to the staged paparazzi photos that destroyed a wedding. Back to private letters exposed in courtrooms. Back to phone calls that went unanswered. Back to a man who once said, "She was my little bean," and who now says, nothing at all. Are you ready? Because once we open this story, there's no turning back. Let's begin. It starts, like so many tragedies, with a quiet warning. A twinge in the lower leg. Some discoloration. Swelling. But for Thomas Markle, this wasn't just old age catching up. It was the beginning of a medical emergency that would spiral into a race against time. His foot turned blue, then black. His son, Thomas Jr., watched in horror. He rushed his father to the nearest hospital in Rosarito, Mexico, where Thomas had been living in relative isolation. But the scans came back grim. A blood clot had formed. Circulation had stopped. The tissue was dying. There was no time to wait. Doctors said the leg had to go immediately. But there was a problem. The local hospital wasn't equipped for something this serious. So in a whirlwind of ambulances, forms, and frantic planning, Thomas Markle was transferred, urgently, to a larger hospital in Cebu, Philippines. A 3-hour surgery was arranged. The leg would be removed below the knee. This was life or death. And Meghan? Silent. No contact. No show of concern. No statement. Not even a one-line message to say, "I'm sorry you're going through this." Now pause for a second. Imagine if this were you. Your father, critically ill, facing the amputation of his leg. Doctors unsure if he'll make it through the night. You've been estranged, sure, but he's your parent. The one who raised you, supported your dreams, defended you, even when it hurt him. Would you go? Would you pick up the phone? Would you at least say goodbye? Or would you stay silent? Because that's what Meghan did. And this is where the story starts to turn. Because Meghan Markle is no longer just a daughter. She's a global figure, a public icon, a woman who built her image on empathy, compassion, female empowerment, and speaking your truth. So when the world sees her ignoring her father's plea from a hospital bed, the question is no longer private. It's public, it's political, it's emotional, and it's viral. Because Thomas Markle may not survive this. And even if he does, he may never walk again. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What came next wasn't a tearful reunion. It wasn't a heartfelt message. It wasn't a last-minute flight, or even a discreet phone call made behind palace doors or Hollywood gates. No, what came next was silence. Again, deliberate, icy, devastating silence. Thomas Markle emerged from surgery with one leg missing and a question burning through the morphine haze. Did Meghan call? He asked his son. He asked the nurses. He asked anyone who came into the room. The answer never changed. No, she hadn't. Not even a message. No flowers. No letter. No attempt at contact, direct or through a third party. Nothing. And in that void, something shifted. Not just in Thomas's hospital room, but across the world. Because the story was spreading. Fast. Every headline screamed the same unbearable truth. Meghan still hasn't reached out. And the reaction? Explosive. TV commentators debated it. Social media turned it into a war zone. Celebrities dropped cryptic responses. Some offered sympathy. Others shared their own estrangement stories. But the real conversation was darker. Rawer. Is this what we've become? A world where someone can block their dying father? Where brand image is more important than blood? Where forgiveness is optional, even at the end? Let me ask you, honestly, if this were your parent, what would you do? Would you stand your ground? Or show up at the hospital? Would you hold on to the pain of past betrayals? Or try to make peace before it's too late? Because for all Meghan's talk of healing and mental health, for all the guided meditation and therapy talk, for all the feminist podcasts and soul-bearing interviews, where was the empathy when her father's leg was on the table? Where was the compassion? Where was the daughter? And here's the haunting part. This wasn't the first time. Not by a long shot. Because this silence, this vanishing act, it's a pattern. Let's rewind. Not to last week. Not to last year. But to 2018, the beginning of the end. It was the wedding of the decade. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Royal, modern, inclusive. Cameras flashing. Choirs singing. Oprah nodding along in the pews. And just days before the fairy tale unfolded, chaos struck. A scandal erupted. Thomas Markle had allegedly staged paparazzi photos. Pictures of him reading books about the UK. Getting fitted for a tuxedo. Smiling awkwardly as the flashbulbs clicked. The media pounced. Meghan reportedly felt betrayed. Humiliated. The narrative flipped. Suddenly, her father wasn't a doting presence walking her down the aisle. He was a cautionary tale. A tabloid sideshow. A man branded toxic before he could even apologize. But here's the twist. Thomas didn't profit much from those photos. He wasn't some mastermind. He was a retired lighting director living in a modest house in Mexico, struggling with health issues, blindsided by global attention. And, he claimed, he was trying to redeem himself, to appear respectable, to not embarrass Meghan. Was it clumsy? Yes. But malicious? That's up for debate. Because in the days following the scandal, Thomas Markle had a heart attack. And Meghan cut him off. Just like that. He never walked her down the aisle. He never met Prince Harry. He never met his grandchildren. He never got closure. Instead, he got banished. Now, you might say, she had every right. Boundaries are valid. Protection is necessary. Sure. But when does boundary setting turn into stonewalling? When does self-preservation start to look like punishment? When does your right to peace become someone else's slow death in silence? Thomas Markle has made mistakes. No one's denying that. But has Meghan ever acknowledged that she might have, too? Has she ever publicly expressed remorse over their total estrangement? Not quite. In fact, in the now infamous Oprah interview, she went so far as to say, "I lost my father. Like he was dead. Like she had buried him long ago." That single sentence sent shockwaves across the globe. Because Thomas wasn't dead. He was sitting in front of his television, watching, hurt, still hoping, still waiting. And now, he might actually die, with that one phrase ringing in his ears. "I lost my father." Now ask yourself, if you were Thomas Markle, how would that feel? To be alive, to be suffering, to have your leg removed, and to hear your daughter say she lost you, like you were already in the ground. This isn't just about a surgery. It's about the symbolic amputation of a father-daughter bond. The slow, steady cutting away of connection, of forgiveness, of humanity. And what makes it all the more unbearable? Thomas still says he loves her. Even now. Even after everything. Even after being iced out of royal life, publicly shamed, sidelined by the media, mocked in interviews, and now, left alone in a foreign hospital bed with one leg gone. He still says he loves her. That he forgives her. That he just wants to hear her voice. That he's proud of her. So why won't she call? Is it really about the paparazzi scandal? Or is there something deeper at play? A darker undercurrent? A vendetta? Because this level of distance, this refusal to even acknowledge a father's amputation, doesn't look like healing. It looks like punishment. It looks like Meghan has made a decision. Not just to cut off communication, but to erase him from the story entirely. To the point where she's willing to let him die without ever hearing from her again. And if that happens, if he passes away before they speak, that silence will become permanent. That guilt, if it exists, will become forever. And no amount of interviews, therapy, Instagram statements, or royal titles will fix it. It will be too late, too final, too real. So now, the world waits. Will Meghan call? Will she visit? Will she offer even the smallest sliver of humanity before time runs out? Because as this video continues, we're going to go deeper. Much deeper. We'll unpack the letters, the silent holidays, the blocked phone numbers, the hospital reports, the secret emotional messages never answered. The family members who say Meghan made a vow to never speak to him again. And why? Because this story isn't over. It's just beginning. And the next chapter is going to reveal a side of Meghan Markle the world has never seen. He waited. The hospital ceiling above him was cold, white, endless. The nurses moved around with quiet efficiency, trying not to disturb him, but they couldn't hide the truth. They all knew who he was. They whispered when they thought he couldn't hear. That's Meghan Markle's father. Do you think she knows? She's not coming, is she? Thomas Markle didn't need to hear them to know the answer. He already felt it in his chest. Not just from the pain of surgery. Not just from the grief of losing a limb. But from something far more brutal. The echo of silence from the one person he hoped would call. She never did. Not before the surgery. Not during. Not after. The call never came. And deep down, as the anesthesia wore off and the full reality of his condition settled into his bones, Thomas Markle realized something that took years to admit. She was never going to call. Let's rewind. Just hours before the operation, Thomas Markle's left leg was turning purple. His foot was already black. There was no more time to wait. He was rushed out of his small home and into an ambulance, clutching his chest not from a heart attack, but from sheer panic. He turned to his son, Thomas Jr., who was by his side every step of the way. He didn't ask about the pain. He didn't ask about the hospital. He asked one thing. Do you think Meghan knows? Let that sink in. Not, will I survive this? Not, how much will they take? But, does my daughter know? This wasn't just about a leg. It was about connection, recognition, reconciliation. Even as he was being prepped for one of the most traumatic surgeries of his life, Thomas Markle's mind was still on her. Still on Meghan. And the tragedy? He had no idea she knew. Because, according to reports from sources close to the family, she absolutely did. How? Because the world knew. The headlines exploded. Every major UK, US, and Australian outlet ran with the story. It was trending globally. Thomas Markle hospitalized. Leg to be amputated. Life or death surgery. Meghan yet to make contact. And Meghan, media-savvy, hyper-connected Meghan, had a team of publicists, assistants, and PR advisors monitoring every word ever written about her or her family. So yes, she knew, and she said nothing. She did nothing. She didn't even issue a polite, pre-written statement like, "We wish him a safe recovery and privacy during this time." Not even that. But this isn't just a story about an ignored phone call. This is about what it represents. Because in those hours before Thomas Markle's leg was removed, the silence from Meghan wasn't just hurtful, it was surgical. It was calculated. It was final. And here's the thing most people don't know. There were multiple people trying to reach out to her. Thomas Jr. allegedly attempted to contact intermediaries close to Meghan. Samantha Markle issued a plea through the press, saying her father has been through enough and needs love, not division. Even friends of the Markle family reportedly reached out, privately, urging Meghan to respond. Not to forgive, not to rebuild a relationship, just to acknowledge what was happening. And she didn't. So the silence became louder, and more damning, and more confusing. Because this is a woman who has championed mental health, emotional wellness, and compassion on the global stage. She's hugged survivors, cried in interviews, preached about kindness on red carpets. So why couldn't she extend that same compassion to her own father, who was literally losing his leg? Why does kindness stop at the edge of the spotlight? Let's go back to the hospital room. After the surgery, Thomas Markle's first words, muffled through exhaustion and medication, were, "Did Meghan call?" When his son shook his head, Thomas just nodded slowly, like he already knew. But this time, he didn't break down. He didn't curse her. He didn't lash out. He whispered, "I hope she's okay." That's the level of grace we're dealing with. A man who had his leg cut off, who has been publicly ridiculed, estranged, and erased from his daughter's narrative, who's been left alone in a foreign hospital bed with no contact, no closure, and no comfort. And still, he hopes she's okay. What does that tell you? It tells you that Thomas Markle isn't the villain in this chapter. He's the father left behind, the one still clinging to a version of his daughter that may no longer exist, the one hoping, praying, that maybe, just maybe, there's still a spark of the old Meghan in there. The Meghan who once held his hand on school trips. The Meghan who once thanked him in her high school graduation speech. The Meghan who once called him her hero. But that version, she's gone. And in her place, a duchess, a brand, a fortress, a woman who seems incapable of forgiveness. Now, let's pause and look at this from another angle. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that Meghan had her reasons. She was hurt. She felt betrayed by the staged photos. She didn't trust him anymore. She needed to protect herself. Fine. But what kind of protection justifies this level of coldness? Because this wasn't a man asking for a press interview. This was a man on an operating table, fighting for his life. And no matter how toxic you think someone is, doesn't life or death demand some kind of humanity? Even just a text? Even just one line? "I hope you're okay." But that line never came. And so the silence became its own kind of cruelty. Let me ask you directly, what would it take for you to call your dying parent? What line would have to be crossed for you to stay silent while they lie in a hospital bed, waiting for a limb to be removed? And more importantly, how would you live with yourself if they died before you made that call? Because that's the danger Meghan now faces. The clock isn't just ticking for Thomas's health. It's ticking on her legacy. Because if he passes away before they speak, this silence will become her history, her regret, her burden. No matter how many podcast episodes she releases, no matter how many humanitarian awards she wins, no matter how many smiles she flashes on the red carpet, this chapter won't go away. It will haunt her, and it will define her, whether she likes it or not. Now here's the part no one's talking about. Sources close to the situation say Meghan wasn't surprised by the surgery. She expected this. In fact, according to one insider, Thomas had warned her in a letter back in January that his circulation was worsening, that he'd already had a stroke and blood clots, that he feared something bad would happen soon. And still, nothing. Which raises the bigger question. Was Meghan not just aware, but indifferent? Has she reached a point where she no longer even flinches at the thought of her father dying? If so, what does that say about the person she's become? Because at some point, silence stops being a boundary and becomes a weapon. And Meghan's silence? It's slicing deeper than any surgeon's scalpel. But the story doesn't end with the operation. Because what happened after the surgery is even more heartbreaking. Thomas Jr., who's been by his father's side throughout the ordeal, says doctors are now extremely concerned about the remaining part of the leg. Infection is setting in. The thigh may be compromised. There are whispers of another amputation. Or worse, sepsis. And again, the silence continues. It's now been days. Still no word. Still no call. Still no Meghan. So the question isn't will she call. It's can she? Has the wall she built around her heart become so tall, so reinforced, that even her father's leg being cut off can't break through? If that's true, then the real tragedy isn't the amputation. It's that Meghan Markle may have amputated her soul a long time ago. And yet, Thomas still waits. He still asks the nurses, any news? He still checks his phone, just in case. He still hopes, because he's a father. And even fathers who've been cast aside still believe in miracles, still dream of the child coming home, still believe the call will come. But here's the truth. The longer she waits, the harder it will be to make that call. And soon, she won't get the chance. Because the next emergency alert won't be about a leg. It'll be about a funeral. And that silence, will be permanent. But what if this isn't just a silence? What if it's a vow? What if Meghan promised herself she would never speak to him again, no matter what? What if the next chapter of this story reveals a decision so cold, so final, it makes this hospital silence look like mercy? Because according to one source, Meghan didn't just go silent. She made a chilling vow. She changed her number. That's what started it. Long before the wedding. Long before the world was watching. Long before the paparazzi photos and the palace protocol and the Netflix documentaries. Meghan Markle changed her number and didn't tell her father. No announcement. No letter. No explanation. Just a sudden silence. And it didn't happen in 2018 like most people think. No. According to Thomas Markle himself, the distancing began quietly, long before she ever set foot in the royal family. Before the world crowned her a duchess. Before she was photographed cradling her bump in designer coats or smiling next to the queen. This wasn't an overnight fallout. It was a slow ghosting. And the person on the receiving end of it? Her father. Her most consistent supporter. Her biggest cheerleader. The man who worked long hours on Hollywood sets to pay for her schooling, her acting classes, her auditions, her dream. He was the one who sent her to the best private schools. Who bought her the car she needed to get to casting calls. Who lit the stages of Married with Children while she waited backstage, wide-eyed. Who brought her on set and whispered, "You can do this, Bean." And in return, silence. Not after a dramatic confrontation. Not after a blow-up argument. But gradually, quietly, like erasing someone with the back of a pencil. So let me ask you, is that how love works? Is that how daughters repay the people who gave them everything? Let's look at the timeline. When Meghan landed her breakout role on Suits, she was overjoyed. She was climbing the ladder. Red carpets, glam teams, Instagram followers, the whole world opening up. And Thomas Markle? He was clapping from the sidelines. Proud, beaming, still living in Mexico, still retired, still watching from afar. He mailed her letters. He emailed. He texted. Sometimes, he says, she replied. Other times, nothing. But after she started dating Prince Harry, the replies stopped altogether. She got a new number. He says he only found out when he tried to call her. And it didn't work. She hadn't told him. He wasn't important enough to inform. And from there, the ghosting began. Not a clean break. Not a tearful goodbye. Just silence. Like vanishing fog. Now here's where the contradictions start. Because in public, Meghan was talking about love, family, connection. She wrote heartfelt blog posts about gratitude. Gushed about her daddy in interviews. Praised his sacrifices. Told Elle in a 2016 article that she was proud to be biracial and that her dad supported her through every moment of identity confusion. She even included him in her now-deleted lifestyle blog, The Tig. But in private, she wasn't calling him. She wasn't visiting him. She wasn't even telling him her number had changed. How does that add up? People don't ghost strangers. They ghost people they can't face. And that's exactly what this looks like. Because Meghan Markle, who built her brand on speaking truth, on healing, on therapy and vulnerability, couldn't bring herself to confront her father. Not directly, not personally. So she did what celebrities are trained to do. She distanced, soft-blocked, muted, delegated. And Thomas? He felt the chill instantly. He tried to reach her during the early days of her royal relationship. He wanted to congratulate her, warn her, guide her. He says he even tried contacting Harry directly, wishing them well. But it was too late. The inner circle had closed. And Thomas Markle? He wasn't in it. The moment the engagement went public, things escalated. Suddenly, the media was on his doorstep. Photographers, journalists, opportunists, all asking about his daughter, her fiancé, her new life. And Thomas, naive to the brutal mechanics of royal press strategy, tried to play nice. He posed for a few pictures, agreed to a few interviews, tried to get ahead of the wave. And that was the beginning of the end. The palace, Meghan said later, was furious. Her image was being compromised, her narrative disrupted. The royals demanded silence. Dignified retreat. But Thomas was a regular man, not a Windsor. He didn't know the rules. And Meghan? She didn't explain them. She didn't coach him, didn't protect him, didn't guide him through the firestorm. She just stopped speaking to him. The final straw? Those staged paparazzi photos. The ones that showed him browsing books about British history, getting fitted for a suit, looking camera-ready. They were tacky, yes. A bit obvious. But monstrous? Disqualifying? Or just desperate? He says he did them to rehabilitate his image. To look presentable. Because the press had already painted him as a recluse. A slob. A risk. So he tried to rebrand himself. Was it the right move? Maybe not. But did it deserve total exile? That's the part people still debate. Because just days after the photo scandal, Thomas says he suffered a heart attack. Meghan never visited. He never made it to the wedding. And after that, he never heard from her again. Now think about that. She got married without him, walked herself down the aisle, had a global event watched by 1.9 billion people, and didn't look back. Didn't even pause. He watched it on TV, alone, from a hospital bed, still recovering, still confused, still waiting for her to call. And she didn't. The call never came. The letter never came. The forgiveness never came. Instead, came the silence. And it never stopped. In 2021, during the explosive Oprah interview, Meghan said, "I lost my father. That was it." Not, "We're working on things." Not, "It's been hard, but I love him." Just, "I lost my father." Like he was already gone. Like he was buried somewhere beneath the wreckage of her rise to royalty. She spoke those words with no hesitation, no emotion, no flicker of hesitation. And watching from his modest home in Mexico, Thomas Markle felt like he had died. Not from illness, but from erasure. Let's talk about what it means to ghost someone. Ghosting isn't about cutting ties after a fight. It's about never giving the other person a chance to explain. It's about rewriting the story in your own voice and leaving theirs out. And in Meghan's case, it meant controlling the narrative with surgical precision. Her team, PR experts, brand managers, media gatekeepers, ensured that the story the world saw was one of peace and boundaries. But the one Thomas was living was abandonment. And now, after all these years, it's not just about the past. It's about the present, the hospital bed, the amputation, the unanswered calls. Because the ghosting hasn't stopped. It's just taken a darker turn, a more permanent one. Thomas Markle isn't asking for an apology anymore. He's not even asking for a relationship. He just wants a voice, recognition, a call, one call. But Meghan won't make it. And at this point, maybe she can't. Because after ghosting someone for this long, how do you come back? How do you reach out after ignoring a stroke? A heart attack? Now a leg amputation? What do you even say? How do you begin? "Hi, Dad. Sorry about the last 6 years. Just saw the news about your leg. Hope you're well." It's almost worse than silence. Because silence, at least, is consistent. But one insider says there was a moment, just before the operation, when Meghan was informed. That she paused. That she considered calling. And that someone in her camp told her not to. Because the optics would be too messy. Because the press would smell blood. Because reconciling during a crisis might look fake. So she stayed silent. Again. Ghosted him one final time. And now? Now there might not be another chance. Because doctors are saying his condition is worsening. Because the infection might spread. Because another surgery might be needed. And if he dies? The ghosting becomes permanent. The narrative becomes locked. The legacy becomes written. And Meghan? She'll be the duchess who ignored her father on his deathbed. Who didn't even say goodbye. Who couldn't pick up the phone, even when he begged, even when the world was watching, even when his body was literally being cut apart. But here's the question no one dares ask. Was this always the plan? Was Meghan always going to ghost him, no matter what? Because according to one close source, she once said, "I'm done. He's not part of my life anymore. No matter what happens. No matter what happens. Even if he gets sick? Even if he dies? Even if he calls from a hospital bed in agony? Yes, even then. But why? Why such a hard line? What happened between them that turned this daughter into a ghost? And what did Meghan vow, behind closed doors, that made her promise never to speak to him again? Because that's the part we're about to uncover. The vow. The fracture. The chilling promise Meghan allegedly made that changed everything. And once you hear it, you'll never look at this silence the same way again. She's done. She's not looking back. Not ever. That's what a former friend of Meghan Markle allegedly said just weeks after the royal wedding. The tone? Final. The delivery? Ice cold. The context? A private conversation at a Hollywood dinner party, far away from the cameras, the tiaras, the protocols, the charities, and the choreographed compassion. It was the moment Meghan didn't expect to be quoted. A rare glimpse behind the mask. A revelation that, if true, changes everything about how we view her estrangement from her father. Because if Meghan said it, if she actually told people behind closed doors that she would never reconcile with Thomas Markle, no matter what, then the silence that followed wasn't hesitation. It was strategy. And the ghosting wasn't emotional. It was intentional, permanent, premeditated. Let's step back. Estrangement isn't unusual. Families break down. People drift. Scars are left. But what makes Meghan's silence so jarring isn't just its severity, it's the sheer finality of it. The consistency, the mechanical repetition of nothing. No statements, no outreach, no moments of nostalgia, no softening during holidays. Not even when health emergencies struck, again and again and again. When Thomas Markle had a heart attack, she stayed silent. When he suffered a stroke, no call. When he was hospitalized during an earthquake, nothing. And now, with his leg amputated and his life hanging in the balance, still no response, not even a whisper. But behind this cold wall of silence may lie something even more chilling, a vow. Because according to multiple insiders, some who knew Meghan before the fame, before the palace, before the titles, this wasn't just a passive freeze-out. It was a deliberate decision, an emotional execution. One insider claims Meghan said, plainly, "He crossed the line. I'm done. He's dead to me." Another remembers a moment, post-engagement, when Meghan allegedly broke down after yet another tabloid story and whispered to a friend, "He's never going to stop. And if I don't shut the door now, he'll ruin everything." Shut the door. Not pause. Not step back. Shut it. Lock it. Throw away the key. And when asked what would happen if he got sick, if he needed help, her reply reportedly, "That's not my responsibility anymore." Now think about that. Think about the psychological transformation someone would have to go through to reach that point. Because this wasn't always the story. There was once a Meghan who adored her father, who wrote long letters, who sent him Father's Day cards with little drawings, who once said, "He gave me everything. He made me who I am." So what changed? What broke? And why did the break feel so irreversible? Here's where the contradictions pile up. Meghan has repeatedly emphasized the importance of healing. Forgiveness. Therapy. Processing trauma. She and Harry have both spoken, publicly and privately, about the need for dialogue, openness, speaking one's truth. But when it comes to her own father, none of that applies. There is no dialogue. There is no truth sharing. Just the quiet snip of the scissors. Cut. Gone. And for those close to her, it's jarring. One old college friend, who has since been frozen out herself, once told a journalist, "She doesn't just distance from people. She erases them." And that's what she did to Thomas Markle. He wasn't just removed from her life. He was deleted from the story. Photos gone. Mentions gone. Communications gone. No family tree. No phone number. No future. Just a blank space where a father used to be. But this vow, this alleged behind-the-scenes decision to never speak to him again, has terrifying implications when you look at what's happening now. Because when Meghan made that vow, Thomas still had both legs. He was still mobile, still writing, still speaking to the press, still sending letters, still hoping. But now, he's missing a limb. He's confined to a hospital bed. He's at the mercy of infection. And doctors are warning that the next 72 hours could be fatal. So the question is, does that vow still stand? Is Meghan really so bound by that private decision that she'd let him die without a single word? And if so, why? What's she afraid of? Some say the vow was based on betrayal. That Meghan felt humiliated by the paparazzi scandal. That she feared he would leak private information. That she saw him as a liability, not a parent. Others say it was about control. That Meghan, like many public figures, needs strict control over her narrative. And Thomas, unfiltered, blunt, stubborn, was impossible to manage. He gave interviews. He wrote letters. He made mistakes. But he didn't stay quiet. And that may have been his greatest sin. Not betrayal, but disobedience. Because in Meghan's world, once you break that code, you're out. Not punished. Not rehabilitated. Just erased. That's the vow. And now? Now she's sticking to it. Even as he loses body parts. Even as he loses hope. Even as the media watches, horrified. Even as family members plead with her, just call him. Even as the world whispers, is this really who she's become? She won't budge. She won't blink. She won't break the vow. And that silence has become deafening. But here's the contradiction no one wants to confront. In the same breath that Meghan claims to advocate for mental health, reconciliation, and open-hearted healing, she's allowing her father to suffer alone. Silenced. Erased. Stripped of the dignity every parent deserves, regardless of past mistakes. Where's the compassion? Where's the humanity? Where's the daughter? Because even if the vow was justified, is it worth this? Is it worth letting a man die alone? Is it worth choosing ego over closure? Is it worth turning forgiveness into weakness? Because that's what it looks like now. A standoff. A grudge turned into gospel. A vow turned into a weapon. And here's the most tragic part of all. Thomas Markle never made a vow. He never said he was done. He never erased her. Even now, even after the surgery, the silence, the abandonment, he still tells anyone who asks, I love her. I just want to talk to her before I go. That's it. He doesn't want revenge. He doesn't want money. He doesn't want headlines. He just wants her voice. One more time. But Meghan's vow is stronger than blood, stronger than empathy, stronger than death. And unless something changes in the next few days, she may carry that vow with her for the rest of her life. As a stain, as a shadow, as the silence that echoes louder than any scandal. But here's the twist. Some believe Meghan never made the vow alone, that someone whispered it into her ear. That the decision to cut Thomas out forever wasn't just hers, but Harry's. That behind Meghan's silence is a prince with a plan. A man who saw Thomas as a threat to their image. A problem to be erased. A danger to their brand. And if that's true, if Harry was the one who pushed for the vow, then the next chapter of this story doesn't lead to peace. It leads to something far more complicated. A royal power play. A hidden ultimatum. A husband who may have sealed a father's fate. Because the next name that surfaces in this heartbreaking saga is Prince Harry himself. He wasn't there for the first phone call. He hadn't yet met Thomas Markle, hadn't shaken his hand, hadn't looked him in the eye. But that didn't stop him from forming an opinion. Prince Harry, once the beloved rogue of the royal family, now rebranded as a modern freedom fighter of media oppression, had made up his mind. Thomas Markle was a liability, a threat, a weakness. And in the world of royals and reputations, weakness isn't tolerated. It's quarantined, then erased. Sources close to the situation claim that Harry made his stance clear from the moment the Markle family drama began to stir, long before the wedding, long before the public knew who Thomas even was. His message was short, blunt, chilling. She doesn't need him. Let that sink in. The man who would later pen an entire memoir about his own tortured relationship with his father. Who would accuse King Charles of emotional neglect, who would cry on Oprah's couch about abandonment, was now the one urging Meghan to abandon hers. And she listened, because when Harry speaks, Meghan hears more than words. She hears validation. She hears strategy. She hears the language of control. And together, they did what Harry had been trained to do his entire life, manage the threat. Let's rewind to the early months of their courtship. Things were heating up quickly. Harry was smitten. Meghan was falling hard. But in the shadows, Thomas Markle, quiet, retired, divorced, lived his modest life in Rosarito, Mexico, with no palace advisors, no media training, no idea what was about to descend on him. Then, the press came knocking. Paparazzi camped outside his house. Reporters stalked him in supermarkets. Headlines speculated wildly about his character, his past, his politics, even his weight. The palace was panicking. And Harry? He was fuming. He reportedly told aides that Thomas couldn't be trusted, that his loose lips and lack of discretion made him dangerous. One royal insider recalls, Harry was obsessed with control. He'd seen what happened to his mother. He was determined to protect Meghan at all costs, even if that meant cutting people out, including her father, especially her father, because Thomas represented something Harry couldn't tolerate: chaos. An unpredictable outsider with a grudge against the press and no loyalty to the palace's media machine. He was a time bomb. So Harry, allegedly, began pushing. First gently, then forcefully. He encouraged Meghan to distance, to not respond, to let the communications team handle it. And once the staged paparazzi photos emerged, that was it. Harry's invisible hand became a clenched fist. He was done, and he expected Meghan to be, too. Now here's where things turn from emotional to strategic. In the royal family, the press isn't just background noise. It's the battlefield, the enemy, the mirror. And Harry, raised in that war zone, learned one thing early: control the narrative or be destroyed by it. So when Thomas Markle started doing interviews, giving statements, breaking silence, it didn't matter what he said. What mattered was that he was speaking at all. To Harry, it was betrayal. To Meghan, it was shame. To both of them, it was unacceptable. And that's when, according to insiders, Harry drew a line. He told Meghan that a reconciliation would send the wrong message. He warned that if she reopened communication, the media would exploit it. He argued that her father was untrustworthy, and he advised her to make a choice: the family you came from, or the one we're building. And that was the moment. That was when the invisible hand closed the door. That was when Meghan stopped calling. Not just because she was angry, but because she was convinced. Because Harry convinced her. Now let's pause. What gives Harry the right? This is the man who has begged, publicly, tearfully, for his own father to accept him. The man who has accused his brother of bullying him. The man who wrote chapters in Spare about feeling unloved, unsupported, misunderstood. So how can that same man be the architect of someone else's estrangement? Because here's the truth Harry doesn't want to face. He's not just repeating his trauma. He's inflicting it. On Thomas Markle. On Meghan. And, some would argue, on himself. Because in trying to shield his wife from the chaos of the press, he may have turned her into something worse. A fortress. A void. A daughter incapable of compassion. And that transformation, that mutation, has Harry's fingerprints all over it. Consider this. After Thomas Markle's leg was amputated and global headlines exploded, not once did Harry issue a public statement. He didn't say, "We're aware of the situation and wish him well." He didn't say, "This is a private family matter and we hope for healing." He said nothing. Radio silence. A coordinated blackout. And that silence wasn't accidental. It was orchestrated. Because when you're building a brand on empowerment and privacy, you can't let a messy parent ruin the aesthetic. Not when you have million-dollar Netflix deals. Not when you're signing with WME. Not when you're pitching children's content about kindness. So Harry made the calculation. And the human cost was Thomas Markle's dignity, his legacy, his peace. But here's where it gets darker. Behind the scenes, insiders say Harry allegedly warned Meghan not to respond. Even when Thomas suffered a stroke in 2022, he feared, according to sources, that re-establishing contact would open the floodgates, that it would bring unwanted press attention, that Thomas might leak their communications. So rather than risk headlines, they risked regret. Rather than risk noise, they embraced silence. And now, Thomas Markle may die without ever hearing from his daughter again. And Harry? He's still silent, still watching, still calculating. Let's be clear, this isn't just about Harry not liking his father-in-law. This is about influence, control, the subtle erosion of human instinct in the name of reputation management. Because Meghan Markle may have once been a daughter who cried when her father was sick. But the Meghan Markle we see now? She's a fortress built brick by her husband. And behind those bricks is a man who decided her past didn't matter, that her pain was his to manage, that her family ties were optional, that silence was strength, and that calculated detachment was love. But what happens when the cost of that detachment becomes death? What happens when the man they ghosted flatlines in a hospital bed? Will Harry stand by the silence? Will Meghan ever realize what she's lost? Because here's what's coming, a public reckoning. The world is watching. The silence is becoming its own scandal. The sympathy for Thomas is rising, and the whispers are getting louder. Harry made her do this. Harry pulled the strings. Harry told her to cut him off. And soon, those whispers will turn to headlines. And when that happens, not even Netflix can edit around it. So what's next? Well, sources say Harry is doubling down. Privately, he reportedly believes they've made the right choice, that it's too late to turn back, that reaching out now would look performative. But that logic, that calculation, could cost them everything. Because silence isn't neutral anymore. It's loud, it's ugly, it's cruel, and it's pointing not just at Meghan, but at Harry. Because if Meghan never picks up that phone, and Thomas Markle dies without hearing from his daughter, then Harry won't just be her husband. He'll be the man who orchestrated the quietest funeral of all, the burial of a father-daughter bond, while the world watched, while the cameras rolled, while he said nothing. But what if someone from inside Harry and Meghan's team didn't agree? What if they thought Thomas deserved better? What if they leaked something that Harry never wanted public? Because according to one former Archewell staffer, there's a phone transcript, a conversation Harry had about Thomas, and what he said could rewrite everything. Imagine this. You're lying in a hospital bed. You've just lost your leg. Your body's fighting off infection. Every hour is a battle against pain, against fear, against time. You can barely sit up, let alone walk. And you realize something. You've never met your grandchildren. You've never held them, never heard them laugh, never looked into their eyes and seen a reflection of your daughter. That's the reality Thomas Markle is facing. Not in theory, not in the abstract. Right now, this moment. As you watch this, Thomas Markle is fighting for his life. Alone, leg amputated, at risk of losing the other, still sedated from surgery, and still, incomprehensibly, estranged from Meghan. But even worse than that, he has never laid eyes on Archie or Lilibet. Not once. Not a single photograph shared directly. Not a Zoom call. Not a birthday FaceTime. Not a shaky home video with giggles in the background. Nothing. Just silence. And in that silence, he's left to imagine their faces. To guess how they smile. To wonder whether Archie inherited Meghan's dimples, or if Lilibet has his eyes. And every second he gets closer to death, that truth becomes sharper than any scalpel. He may die never having met them. And the woman keeping that from him is his daughter. Now ask yourself, what could possibly justify that? Even in fractured families, children are often the bridge. The reason people soften, reconnect, make peace. You've seen it before. Estranged parents brought back together after the birth of a child. Broken siblings reunited at a baptism. Long-lost grandparents re-entering the picture just to hold the next generation. Because when a child is born, something primal kicks in. Walls fall. Hearts open. Even enemies call a temporary truce. But not in this story. Not with Meghan. Not with Harry. Because despite being parents of two young children, both old enough now to form early memories, they've made sure those children have zero connection with Thomas Markle. No introductions. No gestures. No olive branches. Nothing. Just another act of erasure. Let's look at the timeline. Archie was born in May 2019. The world waited with bated breath. Royal watchers clutched pearls. Baby books flew off the shelves. Every camera lens pointed to Frogmore Cottage. And Thomas? He found out through the media. He read headlines like everyone else. And when he sent a message of congratulations, he received no reply. No thank you. No photo of his grandson. Just more silence. It was a pattern, and it was deliberate. Because Meghan's strategy, if it can be called that, has always been one of compartmentalization. She doesn't just walk away from people. She removes them from entire chapters of her life. So when Archie was born, that chapter was rewritten. Her new family began without any acknowledgement of the old one. A clean slate. One where Thomas Markle didn't exist. Fast forward to June 2021. Lilibet is born in California. Named, controversially, after the Queen's private childhood nickname. Once again, global media explosion. Once again, public congratulations. And once again, Thomas left out in the cold. He gave a statement to the press, said he was very pleased to hear the news. He tried to sound upbeat, but behind the smiles was a bitter truth. His granddaughter had arrived, in the same country, and he still wasn't welcome. Still hadn't seen his grandson. Still wasn't allowed to send a gift. Still hadn't been invited to meet the children that bore his DNA. And he said something heartbreaking that day, something that reveals the true agony behind the dignified statements. Someday I hope to meet them. I'd like to hold them, while I still can. And now? Now that day may never come, because he may not live long enough, because Meghan hasn't relented, because Harry hasn't reached out, because even as Thomas lies in a hospital bed, leg gone, condition critical, the ban remains in place. Archie and Lilibet remain unknown to their grandfather, and the tragedy is deepening by the hour. Let's talk about Archie for a moment. He's 4 now, old enough to ask questions, old enough to notice who's in his life and who's not. He's seen the other side of the family, King Charles, Camilla, the cousins in the UK. But has Meghan ever sat him down and said, "This is your Grandpa Thomas"? Has she shown him a photo? Has she ever said, "He helped Mommy become who she is"? Or is he just gone? A blank space? An erased figure from the past? If Archie asks about him, what is he told? If Lilibet looks through old photo albums, does she see her grandfather's face? Or has he been cut from every frame? We don't know. But what we do know is this. Thomas has begged, publicly and privately. He's pleaded in interviews. He's sent birthday wishes through the press. He's remained civil. More so than many others would. He hasn't retaliated. He hasn't attacked the children. He's just asked, over and over, "Please, let me see them." But the answer, it seems, has always been the same. No, no, you may not meet them. No, you may not hold them. No, you may not have this one final joy before you die. And here's where the contradictions become impossible to ignore. Meghan has positioned herself as a protector of children, a fierce advocate of maternal wellness, a woman who co-founded a foundation named after her own children, Archewell. She speaks of nurturing, of creating a better world for the next generation. So where is that compassion now? What better world is she building for Archie and Lilibet when it begins with the erasure of their grandfather? What narrative is she passing on? That family is disposable? That forgiveness is weakness? That legacies are optional? And Harry, where does he stand? He's lost his own mother. He knows the pain of absence. He writes about it, speaks about it, sells books about it. So why can't he see what he's doing? He's letting his children grow up without one half of their identity, without a grandfather who loved Meghan first, who carried her, who paid for her schooling, who beamed with pride when she got her first acting job. Why deny them that? Why deny him that? Especially now, as the end looms closer than ever? Let's talk about the symbolism. A leg amputated. A man hobbled. A patriarch diminished. This isn't just a medical crisis. It's a metaphor. Thomas Markle is being physically reduced while being emotionally erased, piece by piece. And the grandchildren? They're the last piece left. The last thing that could offer healing. A visit. A photo. Even just a card drawn with crayon. Get well soon, Grandpa. It would mean everything. But that's not the story Meghan wants. That's not the brand Harry wants. Because Thomas isn't part of the happy family image they're selling. He's the loose thread, the flaw in the fabric, the truth behind the curtain. And so, they keep him away. They starve him of connection. And in doing so, they starve their children of lineage, of history, of love. And here's what's coming next. If Thomas dies, if Meghan never lets him meet Archie or Lilibet, there will be no redemption arc. No soft reframe. No last-minute reunion to comfort the public. Because the world is watching, and it will remember that Meghan Markle let her father die without letting him hold his grandchildren, and that Harry, who spoke so often of generational trauma, perpetuated it. For what? Control? Image? Pride? Whatever the reason, it's not worth the cost. Because when the machines stop beeping, when the nurses close the curtain, when the funeral arrangements begin, there will be 2 small children with no memory of their grandfather. And a woman with no way to explain why. But there's still time. A window. A crack. A moment. Thomas Markle is still alive. He's still waiting. He's still hoping. Even now. Even after all the silence, even after all the abandonment, even after the surgeries, he still says, I love her. I forgive her. I just want to meet the children. That's all. But if that moment doesn't come soon, it never will. And Meghan? She'll have to live knowing she chose silence over healing. That she chose absence over empathy. That she chose legacy over love. And what comes next could be the moment this entire situation combusts. Because Samantha Markle, Thomas's other daughter, is reportedly preparing to go public with one final message to Meghan. One that could shatter everything. A plea? A threat? A revelation? We'll find out in the next chapter. They've been called everything. Grifters. Liars. Fame-hungry siblings. Tabloid leeches. The media has torn them apart. Social media has crucified them. And even Meghan herself has gone on international television to dismiss them as near strangers. I grew up as an only child, she famously told Oprah in 2021. One sentence. 7 words. Enough to erase an entire bloodline. But Samantha Markle and Thomas Markle Jr. aren't going quietly. Not now. Not with their father's leg amputated. Not with his life hanging in the balance. Not when the woman who once called him Daddy is ignoring his desperate medical crisis from a $14 million Montecito mansion. Because for all the mockery, all the public backlash, and all the questions about motives, these two exiled voices may now be the only ones telling the truth. And what they're saying could change everything. Let's start with Samantha, the older half-sister, the one who was painted as bitter, jealous, irrelevant. Meghan barely acknowledged her, calling her distant, someone she hadn't seen in nearly 2 decades. And yet, here she is, publicly pleading for compassion. In an emotional statement to the press, Samantha said, My father has been through 2 heart attacks, a stroke, an earthquake, and now this. He's 81. He's lost a leg. I'm praying he survives this. But if Meghan doesn't reach out soon, she'll never get the chance again. There's no malice in her voice. No venom. Just exhaustion. And fear. Because while Meghan may be done with the Markle family isn't done hoping she'll come back. At least, not yet. But time is running out. And Samantha knows it. Now let's talk about Thomas Jr., the man who drove his father to the hospital. The man who sat outside the operating room while surgeons prepared to amputate Thomas's left leg. The man who saw the foot turn black. Who heard the doctors say, it's this or death. In an interview with Mail Online, Thomas Jr. laid it out in grim detail. His foot turned blue, then black. It happened fast. They scanned him and said it had to go. He could die. This isn't tabloid drama. It's medical reality. And while Meghan's camp remains silent, Thomas Jr. is speaking out. Not for himself. For his dad. And the raw emotion in his voice isn't about publicity. It's about panic. About a son watching his father disintegrate while his half-sister. Who could help? Who could bring peace? Who could even offer just a moment of comfort? Won't even send a message. There was no option. They said they had to operate now or he might die, Thomas Jr. said. But even as the operation loomed, Thomas Sr. asked the same thing over and over. Has Meghan called? She hadn't. She still hasn't. And that silence is what's now fueling Samantha and Thomas Jr. Because behind the public statements and press interviews, there's something deeper happening. Something personal. These two aren't just fighting for their father's survival. They're fighting for his dignity. They're fighting for the memory of a man who raised Meghan, paid for her education, protected her, and never gave up on her, even when she gave up on him. And now that he's incapacitated, they're his voice, and they're not pulling punches. Samantha, in particular, is preparing what insiders say could be a final public plea, a direct message to Meghan, a media moment, a televised statement, or perhaps an open letter, something emotional, something raw, something dangerous. Because if Meghan continues to remain silent, Samantha may reveal things the Duchess never wanted made public. Personal letters, emails, messages Meghan sent during the early days of her relationship with Harry. Messages that Samantha claims show a very different Meghan than the public has seen. A warmer one, a conflicted one, a daughter who wanted to reconnect. But who, according to Samantha, was pressured into silence. By whom? Well, that's the next bombshell. Because both Samantha and Thomas Jr. have hinted, publicly and privately, that Prince Harry himself discouraged Meghan from reaching out to her father. They allege that Meghan was convinced Thomas was a risk, that she was advised to cut him off, that the Duchess of Sussex was, in essence, coached into estrangement. And now, they're ready to name names, to show the receipts, to blow the lid off what they claim is the real story behind the Markle family breakdown. And if what they're holding on to is real, it could spark a media firestorm that no amount of royal spin can contain. But let's pause here, because you might be wondering, can we trust them? After all, Samantha sued Meghan for defamation. She's written books. She's given interviews. She's clearly not above the spectacle. But here's the thing. Even people with complicated motives can tell the truth. Even broken families have valid pain. And even if Samantha and Thomas Jr. are flawed, they were there. They knew Meghan before the fame, before the palace, before the Netflix deals and Spotify drama. They saw the real her. And what they're saying now isn't vindictive. It's grieving. They're watching their father die. And they're watching Meghan do nothing. That's not tabloid fuel. That's trauma. That's abandonment. That's betrayal in real time. And they're not going to stay quiet about it. Not anymore. Thomas Jr. has even taken things a step further. Sources say he's compiling a timeline of Meghan's silence, down to the day. From the moment she changed her number, to the day she blocked his father from seeing Archie, to the recent hospital incident in Cebu. Why? Because he wants the world to know the truth.